Hey everybody, hope you're doing well. Hope you're enjoying the rainy Wednesday that we have. It feels like April or May. It's just such weird weather for June. It's supposed to be like 90 degrees, being able to swim. We haven't had rain in 2 months. It's not like just doesn't seem like June. But I hope you're enjoying the weather. I still can't get used to this. It's been a while since we've been in my office on Wednesday night. I still don't like it. I was just want to be back at church. Joining Sundays. I hope you are as well. If you haven't gotten to come back on Sunday mornings, we're missing you. Um, but I hope to see you soon. We continue to see new faces come in as we're watching all the stuff. Hopefully, we can keep COVID out of the church and continue to move on like we're doing. That's what we're planning on anyway. And as things change, we'll, of course, change with it. Big Sunday coming up this Sunday. If you haven't been back or if you haven't ever been to Live Oak, I would encourage you to come this Sunday. It's going to be a great day. We got a lot of good stuff going on. We have a baby dedication service. We have some baptisms, and we're also going to be observing the Lord's Supper. So it's going to be a great Sunday. A lot of different stuff going on. So I'll send out a text with all this information here in just a little while or later this week. If servant leaders, we're supposed to meet this Sunday at 10 o'clock. If you can, in any way possible, get there at 9:30. That would be amazing because we have a lot of stuff to go over, a lot of stuff to talk about. We need to go over some stuff on how Sunday's going to look and go through all of those things. And I need to be done in there by 10:30. And if if your family is involved in the service, meaning you are part of the baby dedication or you have a child being baptized, if you could be there at 10:30, that would be terrific as well. We can try to go through everything, the order of service, and go through what it's going to look like, and kind of go through everybody's stuff to make sure that we're all we've got everything ironed out and ready to go. And make the service as smooth as possible. So servant leaders, if you could get there Sunday at 9:30, be appreciated. Families that are being or that are part of the service, meaning you've got a baby being dedicated or you have a child being baptized. I think those families are the same families, but please be there at 10:30, and we'll go over some stuff and get everything out of the way. And then we'll, of course, start service at 11 o'clock. So, again, if you haven't been coming on Sunday mornings, if you've been kind of hesitant, now would be a great time. Um, we had to put all the chairs out for Gloria's funeral, so we just left those out, and they're spread out. You can sit anywhere in the church and kind of stay at least 6 feet away from anyone if you want to. If you want to sit beside somebody, you can sit beside somebody, but there's plenty of chairs so you can spread out and be away from everybody. And again, if you haven't been there yet, if you've never checked us out before, this would be the perfect Sunday to come and check us out and to be a part of what we're calling Celebration Sunday. So that's this Sunday at 11 o'clock. Guys, if you're going to the Gridiron Men's Conference, I haven't forgotten. I've been trying to get everybody's balance together so I can send that out. I'll be sending that out in the next couple of days. We need that turned in by as soon as possible, but the money has to be turned in by the beginning of July, so that's fast approaching. It's the 24th, so be keeping that in the back of your mind. Everybody owes, I think, between 120. I think a couple people owe 160. So somewhere in between there. It's going to be less than 200, more than 100, somewhere in between. Just be prepared. So if you have any questions with that, if your status has changed, meaning you are now going or you now would like to go and you didn't sign up, let me know as soon as possible. We have just a few spots available. If we have any right now, we got a couple people kind of up in the air. And then if you had signed up before and you can't go for whatever reason, the health crisis going on, or you have something planned for that weekend, it's August the 21st and 22nd are the days we'll be gone. We understand because it was supposed to be this past weekend and it got moved back to August. So we understand that people have prior obligations, all that good stuff. It's no problem at all. If you've paid anything, we'll get you your money back. It's not going to be a hassle at all. But if you would like to still go, we'd love to make that possible. I don't know if there's a ghost or a Hollis Todd opening at my door. All right. So tonight we're going to be in 1 Corinthians. We took a couple weeks off. From that, we're going to be back in there. Just kind of a heads up. Chapter 6, we talked about sexual immorality, and Paul addressed that, and there's some stuff going on in the church. Tonight, he's going to start addressing marriage. Now, usually in normal circumstances, we would be sitting in the sanctuary with the adults, and the kids would be in with Miss Amanda and doing some kid stuff, and the youth would be downstairs. But I know these are not normal circumstances. I know that you're probably in your living room or your kitchen or your office or wherever, and I know some of your kids watch. Just giving you a heads up, we will be talking about marriage and sex inside that relationship. So if that's you don't want your kids to sit in and listen to that, that's okay. I just want to give you guys a heads up. I don't think that there's anything in the Bible worth skipping over or moving. I think it's all important. It all needs to be said. But I also understand of having young, inquisitive minds that ask tons and tons of questions. So if you want to move them out of the room or turn this off and watch again later, that's completely okay. I just want to give everybody a heads up because I know that everybody's maybe watching in the room. So he talks about some delicate stuff, nothing too crazy. Just want to pre-warn you, I guess. The inquisitive mind stuff, Hollis, he hears stuff all the time. He just immediately starts asking tons of questions about everything. And I know you have to do the best to explain that. His new thing right now is God, Dad, why did God make blank? He got bit by an ant. He's like, Dad, why did God even make ants? Why do ants exist? Dad, what was God thinking when he made mosquitoes? And today we're out in the woods, we're picking blackberries, and he got caught by a briar. And his immediate response was, Dad, why did God even make briars? So I decided to just dive in with him. And I said, hey, look, briars exist because there was a man and a woman named Adam and Eve, the very first people to ever live on this earth. And they were given one job or told one thing, don't eat of that tree, don't eat of the fruit. God was very specific. And they couldn't handle it, and they ate the fruit. That's called sin. They disobeyed God, what God told them not to do. And because they sinned, we have stuff like briars and sickness and hunger, and all the bad stuff that we have in the world came from that sin. And you can see his little mind just turning, and he looked at me and he's like, so Adam and Eve still alive? And I said, no, they've been dead for hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years. And he said, well, then why didn't God take the briars away with them? And it's getting to the point. He's smarter than me. I'm running out of answers for him. I was not about to get into a theological debate with him or a discussion in the middle of the woods trying to pick blackberries. I just changed the subject. So I completely understand the whole little kids and question stuff. So just a heads up. But we are going to be in chapter 7 of 1 Corinthians. We're going to start in verse number 1. But before we begin, let's go to the Lord in prayer. Father, we want to thank you for allowing us to have this Bible study tonight on YouTube and on Facebook. God, we're thankful for each and every one that gets to watch this video and to hear your word. I pray that you just speak to us, Lord, and help us to better understand what you're saying here, what Paul wrote down, God, and the words that you gave him. God, I pray that we take these words and apply them to our life. I pray that as every week and every Sunday that we go through your word, Lord, it would help us to be better followers, that we would take what we hear, we would apply it to our life, and just be better at being the members of your body in this world, and better relay the gospel to the world that so desperately needs to hear the gospel, and the world that so desperately needs to know what true love is. God, that's up to us to get that to them. And I pray that would be our number one priority. That'd be our number one focus. And you just help guide us to those opportunities. We love you and we thank you for everything that you're doing. In your name I pray. Amen. I'm going to shut this door just real quick. I can hear everything being said and done in there. And also I'm starving. Dallas is cooking supper and it smells really good. So I need to shut that door, kind of keep the stomach growling down. All right. Verse number 1 in chapter 7 of 1 Corinthians. Now concerning the matters of which you wrote, it is good for man not to have sexual relations with a woman. We know from reading the Bible and reading Paul's text specifically, he didn't condone or he didn't condemn sex inside the sanctity of marriage, right? He was all for that. But the fact that he mentions, and it's in quotations, it is good for man not to have sexual relations with a woman. Must have been a rule that the Corinthians had, that even though you're married, you abstain from sex or of any nature. And I think the reason behind that, from what I've read and just common sense, they thought that sex would distract you from what you're supposed to be doing. It would distract you and take your focus and place it on sexual relations and on your wife, or they were, according to chapter 6, they're having problems with everybody, not just your spouse. But it's taking away from your focus that you're supposed to be having on God and other things in your life, and you're completely focused on that. So the rule that they lived by was, let's just not have sexual relations at all. If you're married, it's not okay. If you're not married, it's not okay. It's the rule to live by. Let's just not partake in that, because it's taking your focus off of where it should be. And in the church, that would have been on God and on the church. Verse number 2, but because of the temptation to sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife, and each woman her own husband. We're going to read a little bit later on in this chapter that you're not commanded to be married. All right, it's not a commandment for you to go out and to find a husband or a wife. We tend to think that way, not necessarily that God's going to punish us for not being married, but we grow up thinking that a successful life means that you're married, you have a husband, or you have a wife, and anything short of that is a failure. And that's not the case at all, right? That's not what we're commanded to do. And Paul gets a little bit deeper into that. In fact, he encourages you to go the opposite way of marriage if he had to pick. But we're going to get to that in verse number 6, 7, and 8. But he says, look, if this world, we talked about it in chapter 6 and in the previous chapter, how sexual temptation is everywhere. And it's part of human nature, right? It's part of the human experience to be tempted by lust and sexual sin. And it's everywhere we look. And we talked about how it's on every TV show, every song, every website. It's everywhere that you look. And the world pours it on thick. And it's hard sometimes to avoid that sexual temptation. It trips a lot of us up. And Paul says, look, if you're struggling with that, if that's something that you struggle with, a strong desire for sexual relations, the best thing for you is to get married, because the only way that you can partake in that and not be living in sin is in marriage, right? We understand from the word that any sex outside of a biblical marriage between one man and one woman is sin. It's very clear on that, right? So saying if you're struggling with that, if you're having a hard time getting rid of that temptation or away from that lust, then the best thing that you can do is to be married, because that's the only way to feed that desire and to not sin. Verse number 3, the husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights, and likewise the wife to her husband. This verse, number 3, would have been considered outlandish back in those days. The wife was property of the husband. The wife was there to pleasure her husband, and sex was for the husband, not for the wife. And Paul says, look, it's for both of them. It's for the husband as well as the wife. It's for the enjoyment of both, right? To fulfill both needs. Verse number 4, for the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. Likewise, the husband does not have the authority over his own body, but the wife does. Once married, the woman she has no authority over her body to carry out her own sexual desires outside of her marriage. And the opposite is also true with the husband. He has no authority to go out and to go do whatever he wants to in a sexual nature outside of that marriage. Once they're married, from the beginning of that marriage, the man belongs to his wife, and the wife belongs to her husband. And that's how marriage works, right? So you don't own your own body. You belong to your wife, and wives, you belong to your husbands. Verse number 5, do not deprive one another, except perhaps by agreement for a limited time, that you may devote yourselves to prayer, but then come together again, so that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. Paul is just putting it out there in verse number 5, and we could get as deep as we want to in that, but basically saying, look, if you're in a marriage, a healthy marriage, then there's no reason not to have sexual relations with your wife or with your husband. In fact, abstaining is only going to make you want it more, and it's going to cause you to be tempted harder, and you're going to lose. You don't have self-control. You have a lack of self-control. You're eventually going to sin. He says, look, there's a time, and I understand wanting to be devoted to God. There's nothing should come before that. No, not your husband, not your wife, not your kids. Nothing should come before being devoted to God. And he's saying, look, you can take time and dedicate it to God and pray. And it's good to have time that's specifically, spit it out in a minute, specifically devote to God and have that time for him. But you can also enjoy the gifts that he's given us in life, and sex being one of those things inside of marriage. So saying, look, don't if you're choosing not to partake in that, then you're just depriving yourself. It's not a sin. It's not wrong. It's not wrong to enjoy that with your husband or with your wife. And in fact, if you don't, then you're just asking for it. You're just asking to be tempted and to fall, because you're not fulfilling those needs the way that you should to satisfy that hunger. All right. Verse number 6. This is where we get into where Paul kind of is interesting. All right. Verse number 6. Now is a concession, not a command. I say this. This is where we get into Paul's asterisk almost. He's saying, look, I've told you all this, that sex was designed to be enjoyed by a husband and a wife, but verse number 7, I wish that all were as I myself am. But each has his own gift from God, one of one kind and one of another. He says, look, I wish that you would all remain the way I am. And in verse number 8, we find out what's going on in Paul's personal life, and we figure out where Paul stands in his personal life. But he's like, even though that sex is a great thing and sex is a gift from God between a man and his wife, I still wish that you could just remain as I am. And it's everyone's right to enjoy that gift that God's gave them, but it's not a command. All right, verse number 8, to the unmarried and to the widows, I say that it is good for them to remain single, as I am. So at this time, as Paul's writing this, Paul is a single guy, right? He's unmarried. Now, you can read all the stuff you want to of what was happening in Paul's life, where he had been, what had happened, all this stuff. But at this time he's writing this, he's a single guy. And he's encouraging those that are reading this letter, if you're single and you can abstain from sex, and you're not just dying to fulfill some needs, and you're not just bowing down to this temptation, then it's better for you to stay single. Now, again, this is completely against what we here in American society in the year 2020. This is unheard of. We think that everybody should grow up and be married and have a family, and that's success. But that's not the case. That's not for everyone, right? And look at Paul and look at his life and what he was doing, all right? If you're married, you don't belong to yourself, all right? We read that back then. You're caring for your wife or your husband, and you're caring for your kids, and you're taking care of a household, and you're doing all these things. And listen, there's nothing wrong with that. God didn't say don't get married. In fact, whatever your opinion is, we have to procreate. If we didn't procreate, then we wouldn't exist. All right, people have to have kids, so there has to be a man marry a woman and have children. All right, that has to happen. So it's not a sin. There's nothing wrong with that. That's something that's great. There's very few things more beautiful in this world than a healthy biblical marriage and God blessing that marriage with wonderful children. Right. But if you're married, then your life is dedicated to God, and it's also dedicated to your household. Right, you're obligated to take care of your wife or your husband and your kids, and you have things that you at home that you need to take care of. If you're single, you don't have that. All right, if you're single, then you have nothing but time to devote just to God. Okay, look at Paul. Look what Paul did, and as he's living the single life, right? He was able to go travel the world and be the greatest missionary we've ever seen. He did not have a wife at home. Right, he was able to go out and do anything he wanted to because he wasn't obligated to his household. It freed him up to do a lot of stuff. I was speaking to a young man. It's been a few months ago now, and he's fresh out of high school, and he was telling me his plans and what he wanted to do, and he wanted to travel. He wanted to be a missionary for a short time and go and see the world and serve some very impoverished areas. And I said, look, man, while you're young, while you're unmarried, while you don't have kids, do all that. Go out and see the world. Go out and tell the world about Jesus, because one day you're going to be married, and it's not going to be impossible to do those things, but it's going to get harder and harder and harder, right? It's going to be harder to go and leave your house. It's going to be harder to leave your kids at home. It's going to be harder to leave your wife, and go and do those things. Again, nothing wrong with being married. Nothing wrong with a biblical marriage. Nothing wrong with a big family. But being single, if you can abstain from the sexual lust, being single and being able to go and completely serve the Lord, there's also something special about that, right? Um, when I read this verse, I'll always think of Gloria. She lived a life that was completely dedicated to God. She didn't have a husband. She didn't have her own kids. But because of that, she had thousands of kids. She lived a life that's dedicated to God. And that's what Paul's talking about. He's saying there's nothing wrong with not being married. That's not to be frowned upon. That's not to be, that's not shameful. In fact, there's something special about that. And if you can live that lifestyle, then you're going to be able to do so many great things. Verse number 9, but if they cannot exercise self-control, they should marry. For it is better to marry than to burn with passion. Again, not wrong to marry. In fact, a lot of people need to be married. A lot of people can't fight off these sexual urges or temptation. We need to be married so that we can live inside of a biblical marriage, and not have to suffer from this burning passion that he calls it. Right? Some people don't need to be married. Some people need to be